Hello there, class. It is May the 6th on a Wednesday, and today we will be talking about the basics. What do I mean by the basics? Well, I'm going to be talking about some of the basic grammar, spelling, and other language things that you're going to need to make sure you have a good handle on if you want to do good in a grade 12 course with me. Now, some of the things that I'm going to be talking about might be review for you, which is just fine. But if you aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, then, well, that's a pretty big signal that you need to review this stuff. Now, word to the wise, there's no grammar tests in a grade 12 course. So what that means is, I'm not going to give you a test on this stuff. Your test are going to be the paragraphs you hand in to me, the essays you write, everything you do in the class, right? Those are your grammar tests, right? Because what I want to see is when you write something and give it to me, it should be correct, right? That's your grammar test, right? There's not going to be one of those, oh, circle the one that's correct kind of test, right? Because that's, in my opinion, that stuff's just a sort of waste of time. Anyway, so that's how this is going to go. So let's get started. So let's start with sentences and how we make them. And let's start first with the subject, right? That's the first ingredient you need to have a sentence. So the subject of your sentence is basically what your whole sentence is about, right? It can be a noun or it can be a pronoun, right? A noun being usually the proper name of something and a pronoun being he, she, etc. But you need to have the subject in your sentence, right? So here I've got some examples. The cat is sleeping on the desk. The subject of that sentence is the cat. Or Faisal is the teacher, right? The subject, of course, of that sentence is Faisal, right? Or from the morning, comma, Uranos and Dragos have run around the house, right? The subject there being Uranos and Dragos. Or the last one, he went to the store today, right? The subject of that sentence being he, right? So all of your sentences need to have something that they are about, right? They need to, cover something in terms of a subject matter, right? You can't just have a sentence about nothing. If you do have a sentence about nothing, it's called a sentence fragment, right? As you can see down there, I gave you an example. Going to the class today. Well, okay, who's going? Right? Or this one, and this one, by the way, is very common. I saw these in some of the English grade 11 university essays just last week. Things like this. First of all, is a good idea to stay at home? Okay. Is a good idea for who? Right? Who's the subject there? Right? Just because we have first of all before that doesn't mean that you don't need a subject, right? So you need to have a subject in each of your sentences. Secondly, there's the predicate, right? So first you have your subject and then you have your predicate, and the predicate is what happened to the subject, right? It's usually your verb or your verb and object, right? So in my example sentences here, the cat jumps on the chair. Well, your verb there is jumps and your object there is on the chair. Then we have Faisal is ready to have lunch, right? You've got is as your verb there. That's the action being taken, right? The cat sleeps, right? In that case, it's just a verb, but it's still a complete sentence because, predicate includes verb and object, right? So in that case, the cat, what's it doing? It's sleeping, right? So in each of your sentences, you need to have, first of all, what's the sentence about? And second of all, what is happening to that subject, right? If you don't have a predicate, you're going to end up in fragment territory again, right? Over here, I've got the black and white cat with a pink nose, right? And you might think, oh, well, that's a sentence. It's kind of long, right? But no, there's no verb there, right? There's no action being taken by this black and white cat. It's just a black and white cat with a pink nose that's not doing anything. So it is a fragment because there's no predicate. Same thing here with the teacher wearing a pair of glasses. So in this case, you might think to yourself, oh, the teacher is wearing a pair of glasses, so that's wearing as a verb, so that's a sentence, right? But no, that's a description of the teacher. There's still no verb there. If it were the teacher is wearing a pair of glasses, then that would be a complete sentence. But no, it's just a description of the teacher wearing a pair of glasses, and it's left with that question of did what? What did this teacher do? So we have to answer that in order to have a complete sentence. Now, the third thing you need to remember about sentence structure is whether or not the thing makes a complete idea. Or, in other words, does the sentence make sense within itself? So, what this means is that all of your sentences should be clear based on just that sentence, and you should never have a sentence that leaves the reader thinking, huh? Right? So, for example, the orange cat jumped onto the desk, which meant that the teacher had to stop the lesson, right? The message there is clear, and you can see exactly what I mean, right? There's no dangling ideas in there. The sentence just makes sense, right? It's a complete idea. Same thing with this next sentence. Although it was time to eat, the gray cat was still asleep, right? So all of the ideas are clear, and they make sense in and of themselves. But what you want to avoid is sentences that are called fragments, where you have an incomplete idea. So, for example, although we wanted to go home early, right? You have a sentence there that is promising you new information, right? The word although promises a contrasting idea, right? But then the sentence doesn't give that idea, so it's just a fragment. Or over here, even though we waited, right? That might be something you say aloud, right, when you're talking to people. Oh, well, even though we waited, right? But when you write that sentence down, the idea is incomplete. What is the even though, right? So a sentence has to make sense in and of itself, all right? So that's subject, predicate, and a complete idea. Do you get it, Dragos? Meow. Yes, I do. I need those three things. Good. I'm glad you can get it, and if a cat can get it, then anyone can get it. So, what do you say we move on to commas? Meow. Yes, let's do it. That then brings us to commas. So, rule number 1 of commas and you. If you aren't sure if you have to put a comma, do not do it. Unnecessary commas are called comma splices, and they are bad, right? Because if you have a comma in a sentence that does not need a comma, it completely ruins the sentence. Let's take this first sentence. The kittens were sleeping in the bedroom. If we put a comma in it, it becomes this. Listen carefully. The kittens were sleeping in the bedroom, right? You got that weird pause in the middle of the sentence, right? Chances are that if you are doing that kind of sentence, you're going to confuse your readers. So you always want to avoid putting unnecessary commas in. Over here, the cats took all of the toys, right? So there's that weird pause again. And by the way, that pause is in the worst place, right? Between the subject and the verb. That's never a good thing. You never just want to have subject, comma, and then verb, right? That destroys your sentence 100% of the time. So you never want that. Or here, Dragos is orange with a white spot on her chest. So don't forget what the comma is. It indicates a pause in your speech, right? So if you have a comma in the middle of a sentence like this, then you are essentially breaking your sentences, and it is 100% wrong. And I can tell you as a teacher, it is much easier to understand a student that forgets commas than it is to understand a student that puts a bunch of commas in that should not be there. Comma splices are the worst, right? And you don't want to do them, all right? So rule number 1, if you don't think there should be a comma there, then don't put it. And if you're not sure, don't put it, okay? Don't put extra commas. Don't just throw them on the top like you're making a cake with putting sprinkles on top or something like that. All right? Commas are for when you know they're supposed to be there only. There's also the fact that you can actually hear commas if you listen to them when you read a sentence aloud, right? Because a comma, again, indicates a natural pause in your speech, right? So let's take a look at these 3 sentences here. right, that I've got on the screen. So we've got first, today we went out and bought chips, chocolate, cat food, pasta sauce, and water, right? So listen carefully to the way I read that sentence, all right? I'm going to read it again a little bit slowly this time. Today we went out and bought chips, chocolate, cat food, pasta sauce, and water. Chances are, if you were listening carefully, you might have heard that I pause after saying, today we went out and bought chips. There's a pause. Chocolate, right? And then there's another pause. Cat food. There's a pause here too, right? Pasta sauce and water, right? So there is an easy way to sort of figure out, well, should there be a comma there or not? And that's to read it aloud, right? If you read a sentence fluently, right, you should be able to detect, should there be a comma there or should there not be a comma there? Next sentence, although we wanted to go to work, there was too much traffic. All right, so did you hear it? Did you hear the comma? There's no comma there, but you might have heard it. Let me do it again. Although we wanted to go to work, there was too much traffic, right? So there's a natural pause in there. So we're going to put a comma right there. If we were in a classroom right now, I would be like looking around asking, did you hear it? Did you hear it? Where should I put the comma? Right? But I hope you guys are getting this over at home. Then we've got this. The cats, who are owned by Faisal, are very hyperactive. We read it again. The cats, who are owned by Faisal, are very hyperactive. Right? You might hear it there as well. The cats, there's a comma is there, and then who are owned by Faisal, another comma there. So even if you don't know the rules of the comma, right, you can still pick up those kinds of things as we go along. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's get into the actual rules. So, rule number 1 of using a comma is to separate items on a list. So you use a comma to separate items that are on a list of things that you have placed into a sentence. So let me give you some quick examples now. Today we went to school and studied commas, math, science, and history. Or over here, my cats like to eat, sleep, run around, and cause a lot of trouble. We could go to school, stay at home, go to the mall, or just take a nap. So between each of those items, I put a comma, right? Very simple. When you have a list of things, in the first sentence, commas, math, science, and history, you put a comma between each one. All right, so that's what you do for separating items on a list. You'll notice there's no comma before and or. You may have seen that before in certain settings. That's called the Oxford comma. Generally isn't widely used in Canada, but you can put it if you want. But nevertheless, when you have a bunch of items that you're listing on a list, right, of things, like in any of these sentences, you're going to put a comma between each one, right? Simple? I hope so. Another time you're going to be using commas is when you are using the fanboys, right? The fanboys are your coordinators for putting two ideas together when you are, assembling your sentences, right? I hope if you're in grade 12 that I don't have to explain what the fanboys are, because, that's supposed to be ESLEO business, right? Fanboys, right? Maybe even DO. So I hope you've heard of all of this before, but very quickly, you've got those 7 words, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, right? And whenever we're using those, then before the coordinator, right, he wanted to eat, for he was feeling quite hungry, right? There should be that comma there, right? Or she wanted to eat and he did not want to cook, right? See that comma again right there before the and. We could not go to work, nor could we go to school, right? Again, comma before nor. We wanted to go out, but there is still a lockdown going on, comma before but. Or we could have pizza, or we could just eat some leftovers, comma before or, right? I hope you guys are getting it. Do I have to read them all? So I'll do the other two. He studied hard for the test, comma, yet he still did not do very well. Or he wanted to go to home, so he left the class early. So when you're using your fanboys to coordinate two sentences, then you should be putting a comma before them, right? So for and or, no, For, and, nor, but, or, yet so, right? Those all should have commas before them. Except you should not put a comma when it is not a fanboy. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, no comma with because. Because is not a fanboy, right? So when you have the word because, it should not have a comma in front of it, before it, anywhere around it, right? So 3 examples here. We wanted to go to school because we were sick of being at home. No comma. There was no way to do it because there was no time. No comma. The cats are sleeping because they are tired. No comma. So if you're putting commas near because, you shouldn't be. Stop it. Same thing if you are using a fanboys normally and not to coordinate 2 ideas, then there shouldn't be a comma there either. Like over here, Lily and Faisal are going to the mall, right? So there's and there, and is a fanboy, but in this case, it's not being used to join 2 ideas. It's just being used to tell us there's a double subject, so there should not be a comma. Over here, the cats are so cute. No comma before so, because it's just an adjective in that case, or adverb. And the lockdown is hard but important, right? No comma needed there either. A good way to remember is if there's no new subject, then there is no comma necessary. All right, so that is rule number 2. Comma rule number 3 is the appositive. What the appositive does is it adds extra information about a subject to a sentence that you think the reader needs to know. So what this is it's actually 2 commas at once, and it works like this. We have here the cat, which was black and white, jumped on the desk, right? So you'll notice you've got a comma after cat, and you've got another comma after black and white, right? So what's between those 2 commas is sort of extra information, right? Additional information that we need to know, or that you want the reader to know, right, when you are doing your writing. Same thing in the next one. The teacher who wore glasses taught the lesson, right? So the extra information in that case is an appositive. So this is a very useful tool for a writer, right? When you want to add a little bit more info to your sentences, right? You can throw it in between 2 commas, and well, that can really help, right? Then you got another one here. Martel, who has long black hair, walked up the mountain, right? So that's how that one can work too, right? So now the reader knows that Martel has long black hair, but otherwise the sentence works the same way it always does. All right, so that's what an appositive looks like. Next rule, commas in dialogue, right? You guys aren't going to be writing short stories in this particular course, but this is important to just understand anyhow. So when 2 people are talking in a story or whatever it is, the comma separates what they are saying from the identification of the speaker. So I've got some examples here. We've got my favorite cat is Dragos, comma, and then the end of the quotation mark, Dennis said, right? So between the speaker talking, which is my favorite cat is Dragos, that's what the person said, and the identification of the speaker, which is Dennis said, is going to be a comma, right? Over here, I like Uranos's fur more, Alibicola objected, and he is smart. So you'll notice, because Alibicola objected is in the middle of the sentence, right? We're going to put 2 commas on either side of Alibicola objected. Over here, Jose said, both cats are good, period. Right? So the commas are placed according to where the speaker is. But the thing to know is that, number 1, the comma will never be at the end, right? There's always a period at the end. And between the identification of the speaker and the quotation, there should be a comma. There are 2 exceptions. First is if you have someone asking a question, like over here, who is your English teacher this quad? Suhaila asked, right? So the question mark there, right, is meant to replace the comma, right? So the question mark replaces the comma, or I don't know, but I don't like him yet, Aaron yelled. So the exclamation mark also replaces the comma, right, in that case. Okay, so that's how it works for dialogue. Next, you have joining subordinate and independent clauses. So when you have a subordinate clause, which is one of those sentences that cannot stand on its own, right? Things like because it was raining, or even though we wanted to, or something like that. When you have that kind of clause in your sentence and you want to join it to an independent clause to make a complex sentence, you got to use a comma, right? So that might sound more complicated than it really is, right? It's things like this. Because it was raining, comma, we had to buy an umbrella. Or even though he wanted to sleep, comma, his cat kept meowing. Or in spite of his hard work, comma, he did not get the job. Or when I take a vacation, comma, I love shopping. So these commas are placed before the subject that is the main subject of the sentence, and all they do is they join those little subordinate clauses that if those were their own sentences, they would be fragments, but they need the independent clause to stand on their own, and the comma is doing that for them. So whenever you have a sentence like this, where you have independent clause being joined to a subordinate clause, you just throw a comma in between them, and you are in great shape. Lastly, for today, you also need to have a comma after any kind of transition word or phrase, right? So anytime you have one of those sentences that's like this, first of all, Uranus is very intelligent, or like this, however, we need to think of all the facts, or like this, to conclude, the schools had to shut down for the sake of public health. This one's especially important for writing paragraphs because people like to write first of all, second of all, or for example, or anything like that. Whenever you use a transition, there should be a comma after it. Okay, so always, always, always put a comma after your transition words or phrases. So what do you think, Uranos? Did you learn about commas? Meow. That was boring. I knew all that already. Okay, good. You know what? If you knew all this stuff already, that's a good thing because what it shows is that you are where you should be when it comes to this class. Now remember, there isn't going to be a grammar test in this particular course, right? There's only going to be your paragraphs and reflections, which are coming soon. So for today, this has already been a pretty long video, so I think I should leave it there. But what I am going to do is I am going to leave a link to an article in the Google Classroom, which you guys should read for tomorrow. And yes, that does include you, Erdos. Come on, behave. You're on camera. So I'm going to leave a link to an article in the Google Classroom. If you guys could read that for tomorrow so that you're ready to write about it, that would be great. And remember, your grammar test in this class is going to be not a test, right? It's going to be just you hand in your paragraphs, hand in your essays, hand in whatever it is, and make sure you get all this stuff right with the commas and the sentence fragments and everything like that. All right? So, for now, from Uranos and me, we want to wish you a happy Wednesday, and we will see you next time. Meow. Goodbye. See you next time.